Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our talk this morning. Saturday, which is the July 18th. And I'm only mentioning that because if you watch this on Sunday, it'll be yesterday. And for me, it's not quite then yet because I'm doing this in advance. But that is the day of the birth anniversary of Swami Ramakrishnananda, and of course one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. So I thought that I would spare everyone this heavy Vedanta philosophical talk this morning and speak about Swami Ramakrishnananda, because we don't do it often enough, and we keep giving people a steady diet of a deep philosophy and the intricate Vedantic ideas and everything. And we have in front of us these living examples and embodiments of spiritual stature and grandeur that we forget sometimes that studying the lives of these great souls is at least as beneficial for us. Because we see that these principles that we only read about, we see how they actually embody themselves in the lives and the behavior and teachings of these great souls. So I wanted to talk about the life of Swami Ramakrishnananda. He, of course, was one of the direct disciples, monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, and all of them represent a kind of garland of gems that all have many things in common. They were all men of spiritual realization. They were all tremendous workers. They all had tremendous dedication and devotion and love and compassion. But they all had special features. And the special feature that we find in Swami Ramakrishnananda was this Guru Bhakti and Guru Seva. That of all the direct disciples, he stood alone, head and shoulders above all of them. Even Swamiji and others, when it came to devotion and love of service for Sri Ramakrishna. So I wanted to talk about his life a little bit and this wonderful ideal that we have of how to have love for the Guru, love for the ideal. Because Sri Ramakrishna, he wasn't an ordinary Guru. He was looked upon as Ishta and Guru together. We generally say, well, the Guru will show the Ishta, and the Guru may merge in the Ishta, and we try to see them as one. But in the case of Swami Ramakrishnananda and most of the direct disciples, they made really no distinction. He was the Guru, but he was also the Ishta Devata. He was also the object of their worship. And for Swami Ramakrishnananda, it was something which he did equally when Sri Ramakrishna was in the physical body as when he had passed away, and when he would be worshipped mostly through his photograph or through the relics, because the relics were considered something very, very important at that time, even today. That whenever we read about the initiations that were taking place, the early worship and everything, and it was always with the relics there. So this is what we learn from Swami Ramakrishnananda, this tremendous devotion, tremendously devoted life, and willing to give up everything. We'll see that he was unique in many respects, and he led a life that was quite different in many aspects from the other direct disciples. So as I said, we see each one, though they had so many things in common and they had a great bond of love among all of them, each one had something special that they represented. We could say Swamiji was the ideal karma yogi, even though he was, of course, a brilliant jnana yogi and everything else, but the cyclonic monk who went around the world and carried the message of Sri Ramakrishna, he worked ceaselessly without any self-interest, and his health got ruined and everything, so we have that Swamiji. Then Raja Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda, he was the example for us of spiritual realization, and realization in so many different ways, going into ecstasy and visions and everything, that he resembled Sri Ramakrishna in that respect more than the others. Then we have Swami Turiyananda, the embodiment of calmness and Vedantic wisdom. And with all of the disciples we find that. But with Swami Ramakrishnananda, it was this dasya bhava, this devotion which manifested in that form of the attitude of the servant. The dasya bhava that we see with Hanuman, the attitude of Hanuman towards Rama. So devotion to the Guru, manifesting as service. And there's one thing to say, yes, I love you, but it's another thing to actually do something and to sacrifice everything. The servant is only happy while serving. This is the thing with Hanuman, that they want to be actually doing something for the Guru. So this was, his name was Shashi, so we call it Shashi Maharaj. And it continued without a break from final days of Thakur's life, especially in Kashipur, up to the end of Shashi Maharaj's life, because, as I said, he made no distinction. The service that he did to him in the physical body was done with the equal reverence and love after the passing away of the physical body. When the direct disciples went to Anandpur, and Swamiji was there, of course. This was Christmas Eve in 1886, the same year that Sri Ramakrishna passed away, a few months afterwards. And they all resolved to take monastic vows, and they were giving the names out. Swamiji probably chose the names himself mostly. He considered giving himself the name. He wanted the name. He would have loved the name Ramakrishnananda. But because Shashi Maharaj had such tremendous devotion and Swamiji recognized it, he said no, that he is the one who deserves that name. So it's a great honor to be given that name, Swami Ramakrishnananda, the one who gets bliss through the service to Sri Ramakrishna. The other nice thing about observing his birthday is that it's the one that always comes around, usually a little bit after Guru Purnima. So it's a very nice tie-in. He's the only one of the direct disciples who was born during this period, the month of July, when Guru Purnima comes. And a very nice tie-in that way with Guru Purnima. And after, and I spoke about this last time, I think, how the attitude that we try to have towards the Guru. Okay, so Shashi Bhushan Chakravarti, that was his name, and he was born on July 13th, 1863, in a village called Mail Ichhapur. This, I don't remember exactly where it is. When I was in India in 1992, after taking brahmacharya vows, we all went in a big group. They got a bus together and we went for, pilgrimage of nearby places. We went to Jainabati, Kamarpukur, and Anandpur. But we went there also, so it must be in that area somehow. It had just been acquired, I don't know, a year before or something, very recently acquired as a center of the order. So we may have been the first batch that actually, of all the brahmacharis, to go to visit it. He was the eldest of 8 children, and his father was a court pundit and an expert in tantra. So that meant that he was very learned. He would have been a great Sanskrit scholar. He would have known the scriptures inside and out. But he was also a very pious person and very much dedicated to the worship of the Divine Mother. They say that he had various experiences. He had a vision of the Divine Mother as a young girl. So he grew up in that atmosphere. It's a village atmosphere on the one hand, but on the other hand, these Brahmin families, especially in the village, that was something different. They grew up with a certain standard of honesty and simplicity that we can hardly imagine today. Sri Ramakrishna grew up in that same atmosphere. Now we know that Holy Mother liked to stay veiled. She was very shy. Shashi Maharaj's mother was even shyer. It is said that she kept herself veiled even before him, for his son, her very own son. So she was tremendously shy, but also a very pious person as well. So this is the type of childhood upbringing he had. From a very young age, he would have been taught how to do puja. He would have learned all of the Sanskrit verses that are used in the worship. They say he had a special capacity to sit for an entire day and night, because some of these pujas go on and on and on. Say Durga Puja and other things. So he would sit with his father would perform it, he would learn from his father, and he could remain seated that way the whole time. The other direct disciple was Swami Trigunatitananda. He also could sit without moving, or he would stay on the platform in San Francisco entire day, standing and speaking or doing puja for sometimes 15 hours, something like that, without leaving, even for bathroom or anything like that. So they had some special capacity, these people. He was a brilliant student, and what happened very, very often was these nearby villages, if the student was really brilliant, generally they had some relative who lived in the big city, in Kolkata. So they would be sent there, they would live with their relative, and they would go to a good school and for some type of higher studies. Now it turned out that he had a cousin whose name was Sharat. So Shashi and Sharat, the Swami Sharanananda, Swami Ramakrishnananda, they were cousins. And so they lived together while he went to school, and both knew about Keshav Chandra Sen, the illustrious preacher at the Brahmo Samaj, world famous, and they were very much attracted to him. He attracted so many of the young, educated, English speaking, because they, even though he grew up in the village, that they all went to schools, English medium schools, and so they were all attracted. He was a brilliant speaker. This Keshav must have had something special in order to attract people like Swamiji and Swami Brahmananda and Shashi and Shara, all of them. He must have had something. And Sri Ramakrishna loved him very much. But he lived in the world also. He wasn't an all-renouncing monk that like Sri Ramakrishna. Of course, no one was. But he represented a certain type of ideal that appealed to all of them. The great thing that he did, from our point of view, is that he's the one who introduced all of these young men to Sri Ramakrishna. Not directly exactly, but he had been to visit Sri Ramakrishna. He also was tremendously impressed and appreciative and recognized his spiritual grandeur. And because of the magazine or newspaper that they published, he had articles written about Sri Ramakrishna. He himself went many times. He would take some of his close members with him. So many of them came because of Keshav. And they thought, well, if Keshav thinks that he's a great soul, he must be a great soul. Otherwise, half of the people thought he was a madman. He had a mixed reputation, Sri Ramakrishna. He was thought by a few people to be a great God-realized soul, and by a few people to be thought of, oh, just that madman, and then by another few people to be thought, don't go there, he's dangerous. That he'll kidnap your children, he'll turn them into monks, you won't see them again. So he had this mixed reputation, but the two of them went together. This was October 1883. These two cousins, very rare, that in one family, two such great souls. And Sri Ramakrishna generally would recognize those future disciples, especially those who had a special role to play, not simply the monastic disciples, householder disciples. We see it over and over again. The two great examples, of course, are Swami Vivekananda and Swami Brahmananda. He had visions before they came. Many others he had visions after they came. With the M, later he said, I had a vision the other day of Chaitanya Deva and all of his followers in Kirtan and everything, and I saw Balaram Bose was there, and I think I saw you there also. So sometimes it would be afterwards, sometimes before, when he saw this Shashi and Sharat, when they came together, some reason he started speaking about Christ and about the Bible. And later he said to M that he recognized that these two cousins were disciples of Christ in the previous incarnation. So who knows what he saw and how he saw and who they were. Some people say Peter and Paul. I don't know if Thakur even knew Peter from Paul or anything. I also don't know Peter from Paul. But the other thing we know is that Swami Sharadananda, his cousin, when he went to Rome, to the Vatican, he had some very profound experience, and which to him, in his own mind, this reinforced that idea that he had some connection with Christ at that time. One thing that they understood also when they came to Sri Ramakrishna was that as much as they admired Keshav, that there was something that they weren't getting from him. And they saw that Sri Ramakrishna had something tangible. He had something tangible. We know how Swamiji went around asking everybody, have you seen God? And Thakur was the only one who said, more clearly than I see you. And if you want, I can show him to you. You can also have that realization. So who could say that? As great as Keshav was, he also would have been speechless. That no one else but Thakur at that time could have said something like that. So when he saw Shashi, he also knew that his special role would be to demonstrate to the world this ideal of service, and that he would also have this special relationship with Sri Ramakrishna that the others would not have. And we see this in one particular incident that took place. During the Kashipur period especially, even earlier, even in Dakshineshwar, when Thakur was able at that time to be up and singing and dancing and going into ecstasy and everything, it was seen that some of the other disciples would also have some type of ecstasy. Swami Brahmananda very early did, many of the others later, and in Kashipur also, many of them would have different types of spiritual experiences. We know, of course, about the Kalpataru day when all of them had all these different types of visions and everything. So this Shashi, one day, he went to Sri Ramakrishna and asked if he would grant him some type of experience, some type of realization. So Sri Ramakrishna gave a very nice answer, which indicated to Shashi the really future direction of his life. He said, if you have that experience, that means you go into samadhi or something like that, you have that experience, you won't be able to serve me. Now others also served him, Latu Maharaj and others like that, but they wouldn't get this type of answer. So Shashi replied, then I don't need it. I don't care for that ecstasy, which will take away my opportunity to serve you. So this is one thing. Then, if we analyze very carefully, it almost seems that Sri Ramakrishna had some inkling that Shashi, as Swami Ramakrishnananda, would have work to do in South India. Now, why do I say this? First of all, he grew up in a very orthodox Brahmin family, and the South India was full of the orthodox Brahmins, and Shashi Maharaj, he was vegetarian. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, some of his disciples were vegetarian. Most of them weren't. A few of them were. Swami Akhandananda, Swami Turiyananda, Shashi Maharaj, a few of them were. Some of them who were vegetarian, he would poke them a little bit. There's Swami Akhandananda, Gangadhar. He said, today you'll take prasad from the Kali temple. So he said, oh yeah, so which one? He said, the Kali. From the Kali temple means non-vegetarian food. So he liked to loosen them up a little bit. He just fooling around with them. But he encouraged the Shashi Maharaj, he encouraged him to follow a vegetarian diet. When others were a little bit too orthodox in their thinking, he encouraged it with him. And he also told him to observe Caste restrictions. Now we know Sri Ramakrishna wasn't big on caste restrictions. He wanted his disciples to feel that they all belonged to one caste. This was a teaching that we find prominent in Chaitanya Deva also, that the devotees represent a caste among themselves, one caste. So he encouraged them to dine together, when at that time many of the Brahmins hesitated, and they worried they'll have problems with their community and this and that. But he himself did it. Of course, he was a sannyasin at that time, but he encouraged the others, but not with Shashi Maharaj. For some reason, he encouraged him more to follow these very orthodox habits and customs that he grew up with. And it was because of this that Shashi Maharaj was able to be so successful among the people of South India, because he was sent to Madras, Chennai, now to Madras, and he started the first order of the center in South India. So that was also a tremendous service that he did. South India plays a very special role in our order, partly because of the tremendous help they gave to Swamiji. They were the ones responsible for sending Swamiji to the West. And secondly, because of the work that Shashi Maharaj did. So today, most of our monks, of course, come from Bengal. But after that, probably the next largest will be this Chennai area and Bangalore area, these two, South India in general. So we owe a debt of gratitude to Shashi Maharaj for a lot of the work that was done in South India. We see that he came from a very simple family. They were not a very wealthy family, and he was quite poor. He was just a poor boy, student at this time when he came to see Sri Ramakrishna. At that time, how old would he be? 20. Barely 20. He'll be barely 20 when he first... Same age. It's interesting, 1863. So the same year that Swamiji was born, that Swami Brahmananda was born, Swami Turiyananda, and some of the others. It was a good year. A good year for monks that time. Anyhow, he was quite poor. He wanted to do something for Sri Ramakrishna. What could he afford to buy? Now it was a very hot summer day, and Sri Ramakrishna liked ice. He liked to put ice in ice water, or sometimes even he wanted to try that thing called lemonade. So the Shashi, he bought a big block of ice, and he wrapped it in a newspaper and a cloth and put it on his back and walked over 6 miles to Dakshineshwar. By the time he reached there, whole body was blistered from the sun. It was such a hot day. And when Sri Ramakrishna saw him, he cried out in pain. He saw the blisters on the back, and he felt it himself. He had such a feeling of identification with the Shashi, that he felt that he felt that same burning sensation. And Sri Ramakrishna was really overwhelmed with that love that Shashi Maharaj had for him, and Shashi was also overwhelmed by Sri Ramakrishna's feeling of empathy for him. The real service we start to see in Kashipur, when Sri Ramakrishna was diagnosed with throat cancer. He was moved for a short time to a place called Shampakur, which he hated. And within a day or two, he said, I'm not even going to stay here. He went to Balaram Bosa's house. So they found this. Kashipur was a little bit in the countryside at that time. We'll call it a suburb now, but it was a garden house. It was very common for wealthy people to have a house in Calcutta, and then just outside, a little country house or a garden house. So he was moved there, and that's when his illness, of course, got progressively worse. And all of the young men, boys, who later became the direct disciples, monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, they took a vow to serve Sri Ramakrishna day and night, so by turns. But of all of them, the Shashi, he was there almost the whole time. He really took the whole thing very seriously. The others, not that they weren't equally concerned, but look at Swamiji, for example. He's doing his service. At the same time, he has to worry about this lawsuit after his father passed away. He has to look after the family. He has to study for his law exams that are coming up. And somehow he finds time to do intense spiritual practice, spending nights in Dakshineshwar or in Kashipur in meditation. Many of the others, they did all of this together. They also, they thought Sri Ramakrishna may not live long. This is an ideal time for us to try to go deep in our spiritual practice, to have some type of realization, and he encouraged that. But Shashi Maharaj, he didn't do anything. He only wanted to serve Sri Ramakrishna. So we see that tremendous love manifest in this form of service. So we find how much Ramakrishna appreciated this, and what a deep, of course he loved all of the direct disciples, but we have one nice incident where we see how Sri Ramakrishna felt and how he looked upon these young boys as his very own and cared for them. It was a cold winter night, of course. In Bengal, cold isn't like cold here, but relatively cold winter night. And Shashi Maharaj left. He thought it was a good time to clean the latrine. Now look at this. He's an Orthodox Brahmin, and cleaning a latrine without the slightest hesitation, and because this is for Sri Ramakrishna's service. So he went, and he wanted to do it very quickly, because Sri Ramakrishna was resting, and he could get up at any time. He could need his help for anything. So he went very quickly there, and didn't take time to even put any type of warm covering. He had a very light shawl that he wrapped around him, and he went very quickly. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, somehow in that very painful condition, he saw and he noticed that Shashi had left and was going outside, and it'll be very cold for him. So what happened was that Sri Ramakrishna grabbed a shawl, a heavier shawl. He himself got out of bed and was going towards him, and to that direction, to give the shawl to Shashi Maharaj. We have a few incidents where we think Thakur is incapable of even moving, and yet, out of love for the devotees, he gets up. One time when Girish Ghosh was given some refreshments, and he wanted to see if the water was cool enough. So he got up and went over and tested it. He said, oh, it's not too... It's hard to imagine. Otherwise bedridden, can't do anything, but love for the disciples. So Shashi Maharaj sees that Thakur is coming. He sees with a heavy shawl in his hand, and he starts apologizing. He thinks, oh, maybe Thakur was cold, and he got up himself to get the shawl. I should have done that. And so he said, oh, why didn't you tell me? I would have gotten it. And then Thakur explained, no, I was getting it for you. So then he was, again, overwhelmed to see the tremendous love that Thakur had for him. So the Shashi, he would give up food, he would give up sleep, he didn't care anything about himself. He wanted to stay by Thakur's side day and night. Sometimes he would fan him for hours on end. And the other disciples were ready to do it. And Sri Ramakrishna sometimes would have to force him, let the others do it. They would have to grab it out of his hand. He got such tremendous joy and felt such a privilege to be able to serve that way. The very final day of Sri Ramakrishna's life, this is August 16th, 1886, was of course painful for all of them. But for Shashi it was especially difficult. He gives a very beautiful description of that final day. I want to read that. He said, we all thought he, meaning Sri Ramakrishna, was better because he ate more supper than usual, and he said nothing of going, that means of passing away. He had earlier asked Jogin to look, that's Swami Yogananda, to look at the almanac to see if it was an auspicious day. Also, he had been telling us for some time that the vessel which was floating in the ocean was already 2/3 full of water, and soon the rest would fill up and plunge into the ocean. But we did not really believe that he was going. When Sri Ramakrishna gave up his body, I think it was the most blissful moment of his life. A thrill of joy ran through him. I myself saw it. I remember every incident of that last day. Our master seemed very well and cheerful. In the afternoon, he talked for fully 2 hours to a gentleman who had come to put some questions to him about yoga. Very similar to Swamiji's last day. Huh? He seemed well and he had long talks and conversations. A little later, I ran some 7 miles to bring the doctor. Ran 7 miles to bring the doctor. And this is August. It's hot and humid at that time. When I reached the doctor's house, he was not there, but I was told he was at a certain place. So I ran another mile and met him on the way. He had an engagement and said he could not come. Now, can you imagine telling him I can't come? But I dragged him away just the same. He was strong. He was a big, strong man. Suddenly at 1 o'clock in the morning, he fell towards one side, Sri Ramakrishna. There was a low sound in his throat. I saw all the hairs of his body stand on end. Narendra quickly laid his feet on a quilt and ran downstairs as if he could not bear it. A doctor who was a great devotee and who was feeling his pulse saw that it had stopped and began to weep aloud. "What are you doing?" I asked, this is Shashi Maharaj, impatient with him for acting as if the master had really left us. We all believed it was only samadhi because it had happened so many times, and signs of death were always there when he had that samadhi. We all believed it was only samadhi, so Naren, Swami Vivekananda, came back and we sat down together, some 20 of us, and began repeating all together, Hari Om, Hari Om. That means almost all the monastic disciples and many of the householder disciples. In this way, we waited until 1 or 2 the next day. Still, the body had some heat in it, especially around the back, but the doctor insisted the soul had left it. About 5 o'clock, the body had grown cold, so we placed it on a cot, covered it with garlands, and carried it to the burning ghat. Now, all of them would have been plunged into tremendous state of grief. And we can imagine all of them consoling each other, especially Swamiji. Swamiji had spent so much time with them. Every day he would sit by his side, sometimes hours, and Thakur would give him special instructions and everything. Swami Brahmananda, his own spiritual son. We could think maybe that the Shashi Maharaj, he'll be consoling the 2 of them. They had to console him. That was how much they knew the loss meant to him, even compared to them. So they tried to console him. Latu also, Latu Maharaj, who was also the one who served Sri Ramakrishna so much, they all tried to lift his spirits somehow. But he couldn't even move. He remained motionless in grief. When the time came to collect the ashes after the cremation had been done, it was Shashi. He was the one who collected them and placed them in an urn. From that time forth, Thakur lived in those ashes for him. He really felt that living presence there. And it wasn't Swamiji at this time, even though Thakur told Swamiji, wherever you carry me, I'll stay. It was Shashi Maharaj who carried the urn of ashes on his head back to the Kashipur garden house. And at that time, they kept it on Sri Ramakrishna's bed. We know that there was a little trickery here, that the householder disciples wanted a permanent place for the ashes, so they had decided it would be a Kankurgachi at Ramchandra Datta's garden house. But the monastic disciples felt, no, in the future there'll be a monastery, that we should keep some, and this will be worshipped daily at that time. So without telling them, and with the help of some of the householders, M knew about it, Balaram Bose knew about it. I think it took place in Balaram Bose's house. They took a portion and they kept, actually the major portion, and they kept it separate. But the portion that went to Kashipur, that went to Kankurgachi, was carried again by Shashi Maharaj on his head, that urn, and it was interred there. If you go there, you'll see there's a little area there where they had buried it. And a very, very sad, touching scene. They placed it where it was to be buried, and when they took a shovelful and threw the dirt on top of it, the Shashi cried out in pain, they're hurting Sri Ramakrishna. He felt, it was hard for us to imagine how it was such a real thing to him. And when the devotees heard him say that, they all began to weep. It was a very sad period. We don't think about it too often, but how they were like orphan boys, and the women disciples, the Holy Mother even more so when Thakur passed away. In fact, that was the one reason why he agreed, we can say, to remain in that body that was racked with pain and cancer, because he said, I know when I'm gone that you'll wander the streets weeping for me. So, and it was really true how they survived. The Holy Mother barely survived. Holy Mother had no desire to live even. They had to take her on pilgrimage to Vrindavan, the direct disciples and others. Yogan was there, Kali was there, and she had several visions of Sri Ramakrishna that I haven't really left, I'll be with you. That saved her somehow. Otherwise, they had no desire to live even after he passed away. Now, this incident with the dirt being put on this urn of the ashes was the first indication that the Shashi would now serve Sri Ramakrishna in some type of symbolic form. It'll either be the relics that they kept aside or the photograph, because now they had the photograph. Fortunately, there were several different photographs that were taken of Sri Ramakrishna, and Holy Mother also had that belief that the kaya and chaya, that the body and the shadow of the body and the picture were one and the same, that to worship the picture would be the same as offering worship to the person. So we see the next phase in Baranagar, that the Baranagar Mutt was started, and this dilapidated old house that people thought was haunted, that you couldn't stay on the ground floor because there were snakes there, and anyhow, it was barely livable place, but they were so filled with this spirit of detachment and renunciation that they didn't bother about anything. And they plunged themselves into spiritual practice, day and night, hour after hour, with the meditation and japa, sometimes reading spiritual books and discussions and everything. All of them, they forgot food and sleep, they forgot day and night, all of them, except for Swami Ramakrishnananda. He kept everything together. He didn't bother with anything but the service of Sri Ramakrishna. That meant daily puja, that meant collecting the flowers himself, it meant cooking food himself, cooking food for all of them, doing the worship, washing the vessels, utensils, everything. So this was his spiritual practice. He is the one who really looked after the others. Sometimes we'd have to forcibly stop them from their meditation and say, come, eat something. I cooked something for you. He was almost fanatical about that. There was one incident, I don't remember the details, but Swamiji was teasing him about something, about, you're Thakur and you have to do this and that and everything. He got so angry he was ready to kill Swamiji. And he loved Swamiji. We'll see that the regard that Shashi Maharaj had for Swamiji was something remarkable. Because the other thing is the tremendous humility that he had towards his brother disciples. Forget about Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. That was, of course, there's no question about that. But we would think they're all brother disciples, huh? And they're all around the same age. Why should he have such tremendous devotion for all of the others, especially Swamiji and Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda, that he'll do Sashtanga Pranam to them, full out, he'll do anything for them, as if they're Sri Ramakrishna himself. He had that type of attitude. So he's the one who maintained some semblance of order during this period. Then one by one they all went off for pilgrimage and everything. He stayed. He never went. He never left there. Day after day he did that puja. He would take a little time in the afternoons when others would be sleeping, and he actually went and he earned money. He loved mathematics. Yeah, and he tutored a few students and earned a little money in order to support the monastery. They were so poor at that time. They were given a little money by this Surendra, and M contributed, a few of them contributed, but otherwise they had nothing. And no one's earning anything, of course. Swami Vijnanananda, well, I don't know if he started doing it at that time, but he joined later than the others, partly because they needed funds. He worked as an architect and engineer and sent money to them also to help. So they had a photo of Sri Ramakrishna, which they kept. They had their separate shrine room near the relics, and there's a Shashi. He kept constant vigil over the relics and served as if Sri Ramakrishna were actually there. So that meant that took it very, very seriously. You know, they would offer, you know, this twig that they use for cleaning the teeth, and you have to get the end so that it's very soft. Otherwise, you can cut yourself. If you saw, because later some of them would help. When Swami, when Kali Krishna Maharaj, Swami Virajanandi, others came and they would assist him. If they would keep it a little bit hard, he said, "What are you doing? Thakur's gums will bleed." I mean, it was a real thing. It wasn't that, why not take the attitude that you're actually serving him as if he were alive? It wasn't like that. He is alive. That his gums were hard for us to imagine, but this is the attitude that he had. The flowers had to be perfectly washed, no ants, nothing in it. The food had to be cooked exactly the way Thakur liked it. All of these things were very real for him. And in the early days, he did everything by himself. He didn't bother anybody. He probably thought that they won't do it with enough devotion either. So he did everything by himself. So he kept to his post, and everybody thought that there was no possible way that you could get him to leave. That this was his whole life. Now, Swamiji, in the meantime, had gone to America, to Chicago, at the Parliament of Religions. He went back to India. He wanted to continue the work in America. He wanted some of his brother disciples to go. Swami Sharadananda, Swami Turiyananda, Swami Abhedananda. Who else? Who am I missing? They all went. Trigunatitananda. He wanted Swami Ramakrishnananda to go. So everybody thought, he'll never leave, he'll never agree. But Swamiji wanted it, he was ready to go. Unfortunately, he had some skin condition, very, very painful type of condition, and the doctor said, no, you won't be able to bear the cold weather there. So that was out of the question. But when Swamiji came back in 1897, that first time, then he said that, no. When I was in Madras, coming back, you know, that victory tour that he took. He landed in Colombo first, and then he went to Madras, and he met all of his old disciples, and they wanted to have some permanent center there. And he said that I'll send one of my brother disciples there. And he told Shashi. Everyone thought, no, he won't go. Immediately, he said yes. That Swamiji's word was the same as Thakur's word, because Thakur, Sri Ramakrishna, had told them that in the future I'll live in Narendra, that what he says will be my will. You all follow him. So they did it. They didn't always understand, they didn't always accept everything that he said, but they always had that feeling that this was Thakur's will working through him. So, Swamiji said, I told them when I was in Chennai, I'll send you one who is more orthodox than your most orthodox Brahmins of the South, and who is at the same time incomparable in performing worship, scriptural knowledge, and meditation on God. So this was the opinion that Swamiji had of him. Not that they all just admired Swamiji and Maharaj. Swamiji and Maharaj also had this same tremendous love and reverence and respect for their brother disciples also. Now, he was sent there, but there was no real foundation for an ashram there. There were very few people. Some of Swamiji's disciples, they were young, or they had families, Alasingha and others. They didn't have much money. When Swamiji was not there, the enthusiasm wasn't there. So it was very, very difficult. So he was by himself. He had to perform all of the household duties. He did his best to interest the local people. He went from place to place. He would rent little halls. He would have classes that he would set up there. Very few people came one time, and I think Swami Madhavanandaji was with him, if I remember correctly, that he said, come with me. He was there. He was just young, probably had just joined. He said, come with me. There was a class in one part of the city, some Upanishad class or something. So they went together. They got there. Nobody showed up. And then Swami Ramakrishnananda, he conducted the class for an hour, something like that. And then later, the other Swami, I think Madhavanandaji, he said, Maharaj, can you explain to me, why did you give that class? Nobody was there. And he said, you think I do it for the people, I do it for Sri Ramakrishna. I feel his presence there, and I do it as my offering to him. So that was his attitude. Very often there was nothing to eat. Now, Shashi Maharaj didn't care about eating himself, but that means there's no bhog, there's nothing to offer to Sri Ramakrishna. So he would get angry at Sri Ramakrishna. He would say, what is this? You're not providing any food for me to offer to you. Good, that's fine. I'll go to the beach. I'll take sand. I'll offer that sand to you as a food offering today, and I myself will eat that sand afterwards. And invariably food would come. Something would, some miraculously, something would come. In the beginning of July, he didn't know the date exactly, in 1902, he had a strange vision. He saw Swamiji standing before him, and Swamiji said, look here, Shashi, I threw away this body like spitting out spittle. Sometimes we read, I've spat out this body, and then he sees Swamiji spit. He spits on the ground 2 different times. And he couldn't figure out the meaning of this. Why did he have this vision? And the next morning the cable came that Swamiji had passed away. So this is interesting because even today, and not very spiritual people necessarily, but we find there are many incidents that the time of passing away, that people will know about it, almost as if they're being informed of it. But anyhow, this was, of course, something special with them. And what did he do? He wept bitterly at the loss of Swamiji. This was because Swamiji was the glue that kept everything together. First, it was the loss of Sri Ramakrishna. Well, of course, Holy Mother is still living, and then Swamiji. And he arranged for a very large memorial meeting in the Swamiji's honor in Chennai. His devotion to Swamiji was so wonderful that he went one place and was told that Swamiji had stayed there, and this was the room where he stayed. Immediately he rolled on the ground and kissed the floor, kissed the ground where Swamiji had stood. This was that tremendous devotion that he had. Also the devotion to Swami Brahmananda. And Swami Brahmananda could be moody sometimes. And there was one time, again, I don't remember all the details, but he got a little angry at him, and they didn't talk to him for a couple of days. And he was so upset that he just fell at his feet and grabbed his feet and begged his forgiveness. Whatever I did, please forgive me. Of course, then they embraced and everything. But he had tremendous love for Swami Brahmananda. And we see there were 2 great pilgrimages during his lifetime. One was the visit of Swami Brahmananda, and the other the visit of Holy Mother. And his reverence for Holy Mother was also something very special. They all looked upon Holy Mother, the direct disciples especially, in the same light that they looked upon Sri Ramakrishna. There's no distinction. Some of them would actually say her love was greater, her grace was greater. Whether we take that literally or not, just to show the tremendous devotion that they had. So he looked upon Swami Brahmananda as Sri Ramakrishna himself. He looked upon the Holy Mother as the Divine Mother herself. And in both cases when they came, he himself took them on pilgrimage to all of the famous places of the south, Rameshwaram, and then Bangalore and other places like that. There's a nice incident that took place in Bangalore, when Holy Mother was there. They had taken her up to a place on top of a little hill, a little hillock, they say, where you get a little view of the city and everything. And she was sitting there. And when Swami Ramakrishnananda saw her, then immediately it flashed in his mind that Holy Mother had become what they call Parvata Vasini. Parvata Vasini, the name of Parvati or Durga, the one who dwells on the mountaintop, because she lived in Himalayas. She was actually the daughter of King Himalaya. So because of that incident, and then he chanted some hymns to her and offered some type of worship to her, then now there's a special area that's set aside, and they built something special there. I don't remember how many years ago, so it was almost like a little shrine has been set up there. One of the ways that we see the real greatness of these souls is not just in the way they lived their lives, but in the way that they passed away. And the passing away of Swami Ramakrishnananda was also something very, very wonderful. You don't lead a life like that without seeing the fruits of it at the end. This is very important for us to remember. If we want to have that type of passing away, then we have to lead the type of life that will lead to it. It won't happen by chance. It won't happen by good fortune. We won't call our son Narayana and get liberation. We have to earn it. So we look at the passing away of Swami Ramakrishnananda as something very, very inspiring. So he had worked a long time. His health was never good. I think he had diabetes also. And just many of them worked themselves to death. We can say Swamiji did. Swami Yogananda. He was so austere. They hardly worried about his food and his sleep and everything, and the health was destroyed. So many of them, they had illnesses, and of course, the advances in the field of medicine was not what it is today. Many people died young, but in addition to that, they took no interest in their own physical health, and many of them worked themselves to death. So that was the case for him also. So he was diabetic, and he came down with tuberculosis. This is in April of 1911. So they moved him to the Bangalore ashram. Because at that time it had a very nice climate. I think it's been destroyed now with all of the building that's been done, but it had a good climate at that time. So he was moved there, and he didn't improve very much. So Swami Brahmananda and Swami Sharadananda, his cousin, they asked him to come to Kolkata, and he moved into Udbodhan. So Shashi Maharaj and Sharadananda, two cousins, are living there on the top floor at Udbodhan, and Swami Sharadananda nursed him. Of course, we know that he also had that spirit of service, which in his case was directed toward the Holy Mother. So he nursed his beloved cousin. They were very, very close, of course. And Swami Premananda, who was at that time manager in Bellarmठ, he came very often as he could, to see him. Holy Mother was in Jaidambati at that time. Now, we wonder, why didn't Holy Mother come? And we can only assume that she knew that he wouldn't survive, and it was too painful for her. Each time she lost one of her children, she considered them her children, with Yogan Maharaj, Niranjan Maharaj, Swamiji, it was very, very painful. So we surmise that it was just too painful for her. So she was in Jainabati at the time. Now the interesting thing is that a few days before Swami Ramakrishnananda passed away, he had a vision. Now the vision included Holy Mother, who was still living, Sri Ramakrishna, who had passed away, and Swamiji, who had passed away. So interesting to have a vision. We could say Thakur and Ma came, Thakur and Swamiji came, because they weren't in the physical body. Holy Mother, could she have come in her physical body? Anything's possible, of course. But in any event, this was the vision that he had, and he told his attendant, he said, do you see Thakur, Ma, and Swamiji have come? Spread out in 3 asanas for them, so that they have some place to sit. You welcome them nicely like that. The attendant didn't know what to do. He didn't see anything there. And he said again, don't you fool, can't you see that they've come? So he did that. He spread out the asanas, and then Swami Ramakrishnananda, in the state of practically bedridden, he bowed down 3 times and then said, "Okay, now they're gone. You can remove everything." So that was his way of saying that the time has come. There was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda by the name of Pulin Mitra, and he was a renowned singer. And he came to see Swami Ramakrishnananda. He was a great devotee at that time. And Swami Ramakrishnananda told him of that vision that he had. And he gave him one line. This Pohalo Dukho Urojani, the night of misery is over. And he said, "Can you compose a song?" We're using that line. And he did it practically, he gave that line to Girish Ghosh. And Girish Ghosh practically on the spot composed that song. And then this Pulin Mitra came and sang it to him. Not once, over and over again. He kept saying, it's so beautiful, over and over again. That meant that means that he'll be reunited with Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. Of course, not Holy Mother yet, but with Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji and others. That to these great souls, this world at some point seems like just a mud puddle. That we've had enough of it. We came, we served, we did what we could. Let me go back home to my real place. So it's a very beautiful song. And then he asked to hear Swamiji's Song of Samadhi. So that was the last thing that he heard. He went into an ecstatic mood and then went into a deep state of Samadhi and spent the last 3 hours of his life in that ecstatic state. His face became flushed and his hair stood on end. Then they could see the gaze fixed between the eyebrows, just as we read with the yogis, and then he left his body. So this is the life of Swami Ramakrishnananda, a very inspiring life. What we learn from this is that one can realize God through service, through loving service, through this Guru Bhakti. And this, again, Guru Bhakti is not just devotion to the Guru, but to his chosen ideal. And that this is every bit as great as meditation and japa and study of the scriptures and everything else. But this was specially suited to him. And he's that special example that we have. So on this very auspicious occasion, which to you was yesterday, to me is this coming Saturday, we pray to Thakur Swamiji, Swami Ramakrishnananda, that we also get a little bit of this spirit of selfless service, because it's a very tremendous thing for us to have in our spiritual life. So I thank all of you for attending, of course, virtually, and I'll close with a chant. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kashte Dukha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May all beings be happy. May none suffer from disease. May all realize the good and auspicious. May no one suffer from misery. May everyone be well. May everyone be safe. And we will see you next time. Thank you. Jai Ma. Jai Ma.